Welcome back to the ChessGoals YouTube channel. Today's video is titled Think Like a Chess Master. And what I want to do is teach you guys a new way to think about chess. So above my head, you'll see three columns. We have eval, risk, and reward. What we're going to do is talk through this game and figure out what's the eval, what's the risk, and what's the reward at different parts of the game and teach you guys a different way to think about chess positions. So my opponent here is National Master Andrew Tang. This is before he became a Grandmaster. He played d4. I played knight f6, and after c4, c5, we get a Benko Gambit. Now, if you look at the eval bar over here on the left, 0.9, that means I'm actually worse. White has a 0.9 advantage, so I'm going to slide that down into the worst category. That's going to be 0.5 to a 2-point eval favoring my opponent. But then we also have the risk and reward columns. So the reward gets higher when there's more pressure on my opponent to make mistakes. So that's when I'm going to move this arrow up in the reward column. The risk, when that gets higher, that means there's more pressure on me to make mistakes. So what's happening here is reward has this upward pressure, risk has this downward pressure, and we want to pull that eval arrow in our direction. We want to climb that eval chart. So we want high reward and we want low risk. That's how we're going to get that eval to go in our favor. All right, so here after c5, Andrew plays d5, and we get the Benko Gambit. So I'm actually going to put the reward in the medium category because I know the Benko well, and it's going to put some pressure on White's position, and the eval is still 0.7. So here we see c takes b, a6. And here Andrew plays e3. He decides to decline grabbing the second pawn, which is a perfectly reasonable option. I play bishop to b7. And now what's happening is I'm going after the d pawn. So if you think who has the initiative here, it's black, right? I'm threatening knight takes and bishop takes d5. It's only defended by the queen. But white is up one pawn, and that's reflected in the 0.8 eval. Knight c3 by Andrew, queen to a5, bishop to d2. And here what I should have played, I had in my notes, a takes b5. That'll transpose this to a mainline Benko. But here I played queen to b6. And there was a way for Andrew to take advantage of this. If he would have found knight to a4, that takes advantage of queen to a5, and it's almost a 2-point advantage. So I would have been close to the losing territory. He did not find that. He played knight to f3, natural developing move. And here I took on b5. And after bishop takes b5, I grab the d pawn. So I think at this point, it's actually kind of medium risk for both sides now. If you look at the pieces in the middle, there's a lot of tension here between the knights. That bishop's potentially hanging. The queen's out in the open. So I would say it's getting a little bit dicey, medium risk for both sides, and I'm still worse in terms of the eval. Now we see a4 by Andrew. Nice solid move. I play e6. He castled. And now I played knight to b4. And I put in the notes here that I was pretty happy with this position against National Master Andrew Tang. I like that I had the extra central pawn on d7, which will eventually come up to d5. I have this extra kind of wing pawn on the c file. So d and c pawns in return for the a and b pawns. And I'm also getting very close to completing the development. So I think still medium risk for both. I'm a little bit worse though. So here Andrew plays pawn to e4, bishop to e7, getting ready to complete my development. Knight to e5, and here I castle. There is this option, knight takes d7, but I had this planned out. If knight takes d7, it doesn't work so well after I take, bishop takes, rook f to d8. This bishop moves, and now I can play a move like bishop to d6, threatening bishop to f4. This bishop is pinned. And if you look at my pieces, everything is pretty well placed. I definitely feel I have compensation for the pawn. So he did not go for that potentially free pawn on d7. He retreats his knight, hitting my queen. And at this point, look at the eval bar. It went back to 0. I'm going to move this back to equal. Now, during a game, we don't have the eval bar, but what you can do is train with the engine and try to build a sense of what the evaluation is while you're playing over the board. try to get a good feel for what the eval is. Quiz yourself on positions. So at this point, I play the queen back to c7, and I think it's still medium risk for both because there's a lot of pieces kind of out in the open, but there's no big immediate threats yet. Okay, so here Andrew plays queen to g4. Now I play f5. And I think at this point, I'm going to increase the risk to high for white because, or I'm sorry, the reward is high. So white's risk is high, which means my reward is high. Because all of a sudden, I'm bringing new attackers into the game. This f pawn has a dual threat, and it's backed up by my rook, which also wants to join into the attack. And I have this really strong bishop on the diagonal. My knight's well placed, my queen's well placed, pointing at the king. And I have this bishop that's also pretty powerful, right? Whereas if you look at this bishop on b5, he's kind of stuck out there. This knight on c3 is not doing a lot. Knight on c4 is not doing a lot. I might be biased, but I feel like high reward, medium risk at this point. Now at this point, Andrew plays bishop to f4. And I'd calculated this a few moves ago, and Andrew simply missed that I can play pawn to e5, winning material. So now all of a sudden, this eval goes to winning. It's a 2.9 advantage. I play pawn to e5, and after bishop takes e5, I have queen takes e5. So I'm sacrificing my queen, allowing this capture, knowing that I'm about to win the queen back. Knight takes e5, f takes g4, and at this point, look at the eval, -3. But now let's recalculate the risk and reward. The white king is very safe. All of a sudden, he has the better knight on e5, better than my knights. And I think his bishop is a really strong piece because it's about to come back to c4, getting on this diagonal. So I'm going to say the reward now is in the low territory, and I'm going to keep the risk in the medium territory. There's a few things that I have to figure out here. So here he plays bishop to c4 check. I sidestep the king. Now knight to f7 check. Okay. So by sidestepping the king, I agreed to give the exchange back here, knowing that I was +2 on material. I could have played d5 in this position. E takes d5, bishop to d6. I felt that this gave white too much for the piece. You know, I thought that having the two passed pawns, maybe there would be some issues here long term. I wasn't sure where the play was coming from. That's why I decided to give back the exchange. I felt that this was actually a higher risk position for me, even though the eval is similar. We're looking at like a 2-point advantage in both of these lines. So that's why I did it. I was thinking about the risk in the position. After knight f7 check, I give back the exchange, and bishop f6. Now, if you look at the risk from my point of view, I think it's low again, right? There's really no big threats from white. I eliminated that strong knight that they had. So I'm going to move this back to low, and the eval is still 2.7. So see how we're kind of fighting back and forth. Who can encourage the opponent to make more mistakes while also keeping an eye on the eval, right? Obviously, the eval is the gold standard. We want the eval to be in our favor. We also want to have more chances for the opponent to mess up and less chances for ourselves to mess up. You can feel it this game. Andrew and I are fighting back and forth, trying to make it riskier for the other player. He plays rook f to d1, activating his rook, and I play bishop to d4. I'm shutting down that counterplay. I don't want that rook getting into the game. Bishop to h5 by white. Now I play knight 8 to c6. I'm giving back this pawn, knowing that I pretty much can't defend the pawn anyways, but I want to get these last pieces out. I want this to be a low risk position. Bishop takes g4, and now knight to e5. Look at this knight coming into the game. Now all of a sudden it looks like my 4 minor pieces are well placed, and I think we might even say that the reward is shifting to the medium territory, even though the risk is low. So I'm in a winning position, +2.8, and there's this positive pressure to increase that eval. There's big chances for white to make a mistake here. Bishop to e2 by white. Rook to f8. Bringing my rook finally into the attack. I have a double attack on f2. And Andrew plays king to h1. And during the game, I'm thinking, okay, he's just retreating the king. My position's getting better and better. This is almost feeling like it's going to be an easy win. But I knew how good of a player, how strong of a player Andrew was, especially with tactics. He can find things very quickly, and he's a dynamic player. So I grab this pawn, rook takes f2, and he plays a5. Now, this is interesting because this game was played a long time ago, but I took good notes. So it's fun to go back and read the notes. This move a5 is a blunder. The eval is 4.5 now for black. And I have in my notes, Andrew told me after the game he knew this was a bad move. And I said that I think he does a great job making things very complicated when he's losing, or worse. This game and the last time I played him, I made huge oversights and let him get the win. So I was in a better position against him in a previous game as well. Actually, even larger advantage than this, and he came back to win. He told me that he knew this was bad, but he was trying to increase his chances to win. I played, so I'm going to put this now in the medium risk category because we see this pawn coming down the board, and all of a sudden it's creating some potential problems for me. The bishop and the rook support the a6 square. This pawn is ready to push. I play knight to c2. This is a blunder back. It's still a 3-point advantage. This is not a very good move. Bishop takes c3 would have been better. B takes c, rook takes e2, and after c takes b, this looks scary, but I have enough of an attack with this g2 pressure that this will be a good position. I'm actually threatening a checkmate in 2 right now. Bishop takes g2 and knight to f3 mate. So I played knight c2 though in the game. This is a blunder back. Now Andrew plays a6. I'm starting to feel this pressure, right? What do I do with the bishop? I tuck it back onto a8. That's a good move. Now he plays rook to a5, and all of a sudden I see there might be some back rank issues. This rook is getting extremely active. I still think it's kind of medium risk and reward for both sides. Both sides have active pieces, and it's still winning territory for me. Knight to c6. In the notes, I said, again against Andrew Tang, I thought I was playing the quote-unquote safe move to secure a win. But actually, I should have played a little bit more aggressively here with a move like knight to e3. Knight to e3 hits the rook, hits the g2 pawn, and holds this 4-point advantage. All right, so I played knight to c6. Now we see that eval shift back to the better territory. It's between 0.5 and 2. I'm not winning anymore. Rook to b5 by white. And I see some ideas of the rook trying to come back here. I retreat my rook back to f8. This gets rid of my advantage, essentially. We're now at 0.4, close to equal. Andrew plays rook to f1. I take f1. And after bishop takes f1, all of a sudden, white has the advantage, and it's a 2.3 advantage. This goes up to, white advantage, so I am losing. And if you look at the resulting position, I would say it's still medium risk for both sides. The table's completely turned. I play knight 2 to b4, knight to d5 by Andrew. And this kind of shows the riskiness for both sides because now it went from losing back to equal. But I have to find the correct move here. I played knight takes a6. That's the correct move. It's still probably medium risk for both sides. I won that pawn back. I'm up 1 point in terms of material. So it's a knight and bishop for a rook. We have equal number of pawns. We each have another knight and a bishop on the board. And at this point, Andrew plays rook to b6. Look at all this pressure on my position, right? Both knights are attacked. Got to think about back rank issues. This bishop on f1 is also pointing at my knight. So I play knight a to b4, which is a good move. He plays knight to c7. And at this point, c4 is supposedly equal. I play bishop takes b2, blunder, and he's able to play knight takes a8. After king g8, rook b7, He's up one on material, and at this point, he was able to cruise pretty comfortably for the win. Knight e5, knight b6. All of a sudden now, if you look at my pieces, I'm not creating any threats around the king. So the reward shifts from medium to low. I think the risk is probably down to low now as well. There's no huge threats for white, but he's up 2 points in material. He's got a rook and I don't. And at this point, my king is trapped. So it's still low risk. I'm still losing. After king h8, I resign because I actually have no moves at all. And I know his king's going to just march up the board. So I'm going to call this the ChessGoals Risk-Reward Eval system. I hope you guys like this video, how to think like a master. It's one master and one almost master battling it out, trying to keep an eye on not only the evaluation of the position, but the odds that the other player makes a mistake. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to subscribe, click the like, and let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.